Yo ho ho! It's that season again. Ancoma revamped something again, and it's foggernaut. Few of you know that I have made a foggernaut guide before, but since the revamp, revamped everything from the class, that guide is no longer usable. So I'm making a new one. Small note though, the patch is new, like really new. So at best, this will be a prototype guide and will probably not be my final build. But as for the build, I have come up with its ranged water damage based build, with an emphasis on survival and solo grinding rifts. A bit like my earlier one, but instead of armor building, it will rely on self-healing and movement. Without further ado, let's get into it. We start with the passives and my reasoning for taking them. Energy moderation. While the 30% armor is not exactly no longer usable, since we are not using earth spells, the 1 MP and 2 range is super useful. The downside is that you'll need to keep the wakfu points up at max value pretty much all the time. Luckily, due to the new SP and WP mechanic, it's not exactly a problem, but it will take a turn to get there. Hint: using fire spell as a final spell, the turret will go to no damage mode, but will stacify every enemy it sees, and since SP will convert to WP if your SP is full, this is a way to keep your WP maxed in rifts. Mechanical substitution. I'm taking this for one reason only. While the fire spell AoE is handy, and the -1 to stasified is a steep price to pay, the water effect this opens up with the turret is just too good to ignore. This passive is not in any way needed, but I personally value the ability to reposition fast and in long ranges, so this was a no-brainer. And that brings us to Manhunt. If I'm honest, this is a dead passive here, but I'm taking this only for the +1 stasify that I lost due to mechanical substitution. This will increase the CD of the turret by 1, so this is by far the priciest part of the build. That being said, stasified is too useful, and I do want to keep it at reasonable levels, so more or less a forced pick. Immediate execution. Now we are talking. I love this one. Sure, it forces you into a cycle of casting and then waiting for a cooldown, but 3 AP and 30% to stasis for a turn? Yes, please. Yes, it will eat all your SP at the end of it, so keeping your turret safe is a high priority, since you can gain all of it back pretty quick as long as it's alive. Patience. If you're at max SP, you gain 2 more SP that will stack to 4. They can't be regenerated, but they go on top of your main SP pool. You will gain those back, but only by fulfilling the passive's condition again. This is just useful since a lot of spells have an SP price, so the more SP you have, the more options you have. Brutal transfer. Since SP will convert to wakfu, and your aim is to keep your wakfu as high as possible, well, free DMG, what's not to like? You gain 5% DMG for each wakfu point generated, and since the fire mode turret can hit practically anything it sees, you'll have a lot of excess SP to wakfu conversion going on. Might as well take this. These were the passives I gravitated towards, not the fun part, spells. Let's start with the neutral ones. Hypertension. This spell is super versatile and I love it. You can panic regen wakfu, or do some good damage, or heal yourself. And when you solo rifts, boy is this useful. Since it will heal you based on the turret's health, but the turret's health is based on your health, and your health in rifts is based on the number of players in that rift, and if you solo, boy is it tasty. It pretty much guaranteed the "no, I will not die" button. Armor plating. Gives armor 10% of your HP, and will share your block value to your mechanics like turret or blockades. This is not a must pick, and there are better spells you could take, but personally, I prefer to be safe than sorry, since it has the potential to save you. Machinery. Changes the MP value used on the rails to be 1 MP no matter the distance. So very useful since rails are by default 7 cells now, and you can have 6 rails nodes. But if I'm being 100% here, I'm taking this because of the stab effect it can give to enemies. Being able to stab annoying mobs is just too useful to pass, and it bumps the value of the rails, so win-win. Stasis Flux. This is delightful. You can buff your range and DMG, or decrease the target's resistance by 150. This is the spell you will combine with a Froggenator, and immediate execution passive when something needs to be unalived. Transition. This is very useful, especially if you're using the gunner mode a lot. You can build rails so they're not connected. As long as there's 4 space gap for the next node, you can just hop between rail systems. But it has other uses as well. A cheeky escape combo with this is just placing a node where you want to go. Remember within 4 cells and just use transition. It's a bit wakfu heavy escape, but definitely a useful asset. Elemental spells. The focus will be on water spells since the bulk of your damage will come from here. But you should have all elements in your deck to toggle turret modes or manage enemy stats. Let us start with the water spells. A quick note, water spells rely heavily on the high pressure mechanic. For every water spell you cast, you gain 1 high pressure point, and with 2 points the spell gains an effect. We'll be using these effects, so managing your high pressure is important. You want to start your turn with a minimum of 1, but ideally you want to start with 2. Current. Pushes the target 1 cell and does 49 damage, but will repeat DMG if a collision happens, gives 1 high pressure. At 2 high pressure, the spell will push the target 4 cells. If you can get a collision, it's a solid DMG spell, but I mostly use it to gain high pressure if the main spells are on cast limit. Froth. 4 AP AoE spells go on straight line with 3 cells wide AoE. Nothing amazing, but when you have 2 high pressure, things change. At 2 high pressure, you will be refunded 4 AP, making the spell basically free damage. Keep in mind that the spell has 2 casts per turn limit. So to get the maximum value out of this spell, you should only be casting it if your high pressure is at 2. Pilfer 3 AP straight line spell that needs no line of sight. 3 a turn cast limit, this is the spell you should combo with Froth. At 2 high pressure, it'll give a 30% penalty to block and critical hits for the enemy you hit with, but you should use this to manage high pressure and to deal damage. Here's a use scenario. Start by casting Current 2 times. Follow this with a 4th, and end your turn by casting Pilfer 2 times. You now start your next turn with 2 high pressure points, so now you can open with Froth and follow it with 2 Pilfers. And since you have 2 high pressure again, which means yet a free Froth, then you just finish your turn with a Pilfer, leaving you with 1 high pressure. Basically, you just juggle your water spells around to gain free Froth spells. Now the fire spells. Flambe. Mainly use this to trigger the turret to switch up to fire mode so it can spread Stasify faster and further away. But it does also have an added benefit. It makes the area around the turret a zone where no one really wants to go. It creates a rather large fire glyph around your turret, so if you have a spare AP and want to change it into fire mode, it's rather useful. I wouldn't rely on it as a DMG spell though. Scuttle. I'm an avid fan of big booms. This will be the "You're deleted from the gene pool" button. Primarily use this with the Froggenator, and make sure you have Stasified levels. It does high damage and adds X amount of damage for each level of Stasified. Can also be used to remove turret to regain 3 AP, but honestly, I fail to see any scenario where you would want to do this instead of Hypertension. Finally, the single solitary Earth spell. Bombardment. I'm not gonna lie, the main reason why I'm taking this is nostalgia. This used to be by far my favorite spell back when foggernauts were released, but that's not the only reason. It is cheap, so you can use it to trigger the turret into Earth mode, and it does do sort of good DMG as well. For each cast you do with it on the same turn will add X amount of damage. The downside, you have to target something. So if you absolutely need to trigger Earth and have nothing nearby to whack, it can be a bit annoying. And now let's move on. Psych. Trampoline. It is a no-brainer spell. It does decent damage, but that's not why you take this. It keeps the old MP debuffing when cast on the enemy, up to 4 MP. But as a new improved perk, you can now stabilize allied targets. It will chip their MP as well, so be mindful. But we know how damn useful the ability to stabilize something is. I still have nightmares about Steelbeak. Thanks, Ankama. That was indeed very cool. A very fair ultimate boss, with plenty of room to make mistakes. Now we can move to the final portion. Stats and gear. This is a primary mid-range build with some AoE in it. So not that many radical changes to old stats distribution. But if you're unsure where to place your points, here's what I did. INT, max your resistance. After that, pour everything else to HP. STR, maximize range damage and rest to elemental. You can pick up AoE DMG as well if you want to, but honestly, I find this to be a true and tested way to build this part of the stats. AGI, force of will. Maximize this stat is simply too useful. After that, you can split the rest to either pure dodge or lock dodge stats. I used to be a diehard believer in lock dodge split, but since my fogger no longer has the option of switching into pseudo tank, it's better to go with dodge. Fortune. A lot of this is based on your gear. If you don't have limitations placed by your items, then the good old crit plus crit DMG is the way to go here. I'm still debating about should I take berserker damage like in my old build, but I'm more or less leaning towards no. Major. AP, MP, DMG done, and resistance. AP and MP are self-explanatory. Taking range and dropping either DMG done or resistance is not a bad option either. Gear is always a complicated question and depends on your level more than anything else. But if you have any questions about this, ask in the comments. But as a rule, you should try to complement the stats that you already have. So aim for gear that gives range DMG or AoE. And if you see an option to have an extra range, or MP, you should probably go for it. As for sublimations, same rules apply. But I will stay in my opinion that you should not invest time or effort to maximize them until higher levels, like post 200 level. Some of them are absolute pains to get, and you will need to rehunt them for basically all new level caps. Unless you're made of commas. Or hate your free time, just wait until you're at the upper zenith, or preferably at the summit. And yes, I will simp for the MP until the day I die. So I keep using the plus MP sublimation. Thank you for asking. If you made it this far, share your mouth sounds in text form below, and gently pet the like button or horribly abuse the dislike one.